many of us, Duluth and the surrounding area is simply home. Let us make it more than that for you. First, we will take you back to the European colonization of Duluth. Next, we will show the lives of the Native American tribes and the start of an economy in the Duluth area. We then elaborate on the growing economy of the early 1900s and the conflict that led to the lynching of innocent men. Finally, we will tell you the history behind some of the iconic landmarks and local legends of the area. First, we will discuss the beginning of the European colonization as well as the area around Duluth. What a lot of us don't know or don't think about was that Native Americans were walking the lands of Duluth before the French were. The Indian tribes, such as the Cherokee, were actually the first known inhabitants of the western Lake Superior region. It wasn't until the 1650s or 1660s that a Frenchman named Pierre Radisson explored the area. However, because Radisson was trading without King Louis's permission, they were told to return back to Montreal and deeply criticized. The king then sent Daniel Gracelyn, also known as Sieur de Lutte, to the area to negotiate a truce between the competing American Indian groups. The negotiation was successful, and Sieur de Lutte set up fur trade routes in 1679. The city was named Duluth in honor of him in 1856.
Native American history in Duluth, Minnesota is something that is very interesting, something that's often kind of overlooked a little bit. When we talk about the development of the northern cities or big lumber cities, we often talk about the influence from immigrants coming from Germany and Scandinavia. Often we assume most of the areas of northern Minnesota are mainly German, and that's true. A lot of immigrants from those areas came over. But the Native Americans have a deep-rooted history in Duluth, and it's growing into the city it is today, something that's interesting to look at and the effect it's had over time. So obviously Duluth never was what it once was. It started as a French trade post. Something that the French did quite often was they would build trade posts, smaller ones, around to trade with the natives. They did this compared to settling major areas. This was more of effective for their strategy of the New World colonization. They wanted monetary value, and they wanted to trade with different people and bring luxuries to and from the New World. And through this, they developed a strong relation with the natives in the area, often marrying into families and forming alliances. And we can see that in the French and Indian War, where the natives and the French worked together to fight the British. So the natives in the area weren't always persecuted. That's something to look at. Obviously, their treatment of the British was worse than the French, but it's not as bad as in Eastern America, where often, they were slaughtered or driven out. They were often lived in a coexistent policy. So that's something you want to look at there too. Obviously, they were mistreated still, but it's important that we take into account that they've had a less rough history with us than others have. So through that, they were able to stay in the area, in fact, on very nearby reservations, like the Fond du Lac Reservation. And over time, as the city grew, for example, the first land rush hit of copper and iron, they would work from the reservation in Duluth, which was a trade city which grew over time due to its port, something that the natives used for many years. They used its port for their self-sufficiency. Now it was used for trading. So in an entirely new light, it's also the lifeblood of Duluth, its port. They would work on the mines, and they would, run shops, and also they would do lumber work and steel work for the upcoming railroad business. A lot of their work was put in from the reservation, and as jobs slowly whittled away there, more and more were starting to come to the city of Duluth. So it's important to look at, yes, there was that influence from overseas, but even just around the area, immigrants moving in the city just from nearby reservations was extremely important. Due to this and the influx of people from both sides, some people even thought Duluth would outgrow Chicago by 1850. We know how that went, but it's an interesting fact. Thank you.
Now we will discuss how Duluth developed from a home for the Ojibwe Nation into a prosperous port city and some of the issues and conflicts that arose during the continued growth. According to the Minnesota Historical Society, the population of Duluth doubled from the years 1900 to 1920, so that made the population about 100,000 people. What was drawing all these people here? Well, it was factories and shipyards and railroads and the United States Steel Corps. So there's lots of jobs, lots of growth. It was like the Industrial Revolution, and so there was like people had work and they could build lives here. So at this time, the racial makeup of Duluth was about 30% foreign born. So there were Finns and Slavs and Germans and Russians and other Europeans. And then there was also a tiny black community of about 495 people. So during this time, the whole of the U.S. was like there was this simmering kind of racial tension, and it would sometimes explode into these massive race riots. And as black people would migrate up from the South, trying to escape like some of the discrimination that was going on down there, they faced more discrimination in the North because like they would be paid less, and so they were often used as strike breakers. And so all the working class was just really angry, and there was a lot of anger and hatred directed toward black people. And Duluth was not immune to this sort of hatred. So it all kind of culminated in Duluth on June 15th of 1990. So the circus came to town, and it was exciting, it was a fun time, and everybody was looking forward to it. And two young people went to the circus that day, Irene Tuscan and James Sullivan. They were about 18 and 19. And so that night they went to the circus, and then something happened, and they accused 6 black men of holding them at gunpoint and raping Irene Tuscan. The next morning, Irene was examined by the doctor, and there was no sign that that had happened. But by then it had been reported, and the whole of Duluth kind of exploded into rage. And so 6 black men were arrested, and they were held in the county jail, and a mob between 1,000 and 10,000, it was chaos, came to arrest them, and they took them out from there and beat them and hung them. And it was a terrible stain on Duluth's history, on Minnesota's history, but it's wonderful that that's not all Duluth is known for.
Finally, we will discuss one of Duluth's iconic landmarks and local legends, the Nopaming Sanatorium. According to an article written by Dan Turner for the Zenith City Online, the idea for a tuberculosis hospital came to Duluth in 1908 by Dr. Edward Tuohy of the St. Mary's Hospital, who is also known to be the grandfather of the tuberculosis hospital movement. The first buildings opened on May 22, 1912, which included the Hart's House and a children's cottage, which doubled as an open-air school, with the second floor having large hinged sections that opened to the elements of the cold, clean air, which was thought to be the best way to treat tuberculosis. By 1939, a total of 31 buildings were constructed to accommodate the 200 to 300 staff and patients that called Nopaming home. These buildings included an operating room, which was used for all chest surgeries, and a stage where plays were performed for the patients. By 1950, chemotherapy for tuberculosis was 91% effective and rendered things that Nopaming was doing obsolete. In 1971, Nopaming became a nursing home, but it was too costly, so on November 25th, 2002, Nopaming had outlived its usefulness, and the remaining patients were moved and Nopaming's doors were shut. Duluth News Tribune wrote an article in 2017 about the tours given at this historic building and the stories of ghosts and hauntings. In 2015, the Ghost Adventures investigators came to Nopaming and gave the ideas of ghosts, such as a little girl that can be heard giggling in a white gown, and Native American spirits that haunt the grounds. There is also believed to be a murder-suicide where a man killed an orderly and then killed himself on Mother's Day of 1940. As of October 2019, the tours have been placed on hold. Black mold, lead paint, and vandalism have been costly to repair, and it is more cost efficient to board up the windows and shut the doors. According to the Nopaming's Facebook page, it was stated that the town board wouldn't give a permit for tours unless the owners renovated to a more modern need for the guests, which would take away from the historic, haunted aspect of the buildings and grounds. In conclusion, Duluth is more than simply a home, We showed you how it colonized and illustrated the way the Native American population lived and how the economy started. We illustrated the early parts of the 1900s and how the economy grew and the dark side that came with it. We also told you the history behind one of Duluth's local landmarks and legends. In doing so, we hope that we have deepened your understanding and appreciation for the place many of us call home.